Next up, we will take up Representative Chairwoman McAtee's bill, House Bill 5147, which would provide a statutory framework for the licensing and regulation of genetic counselors. Chairwoman McAtee, you may proceed.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, members of the committee. This is either my second or third time with this bill, and it needs to pass this year. What this bill does is it gives us a licensing mechanism for genetic counselors here in Rhode Island, which we currently have no mechanism to license any of these people. Massachusetts has licensing, Connecticut has licensing. Most of the states in the United States have a licensing procedure for genetic counselors. Now, this started, I was contacted by a constituent of mine who had breast cancer and used a genetic counselor in her therapy, and as she went on in, after she had her treatment, and she had the breast cancer gene, which she decided to go to a genetic counselor, and you will hear from her tonight, so she will tell you the story on how difficult it was to get somebody. She ended up going to Boston. But I since then have met with Dr. Silvestro, who is an oncologist at Women and Infants. I've also met with Jen, who is his genetic counselor. She explained to me as well, they both did, that we don't have enough genetic counselors. I believe they tell us we have about 20, but most of them don't work in Rhode Island because we don't have any means for them to work. So what the doctors have to do now is put them on their payroll. I got to take this off. I can't keep talking like this, if you guys don't mind. They have to put them on the payroll with the doctor in the hospital to have them work with the patients. And the Dr. Silvestro will tell you, he's also going to come on tonight and tell you how it's painful, the hours that you have to spend with patients who find out they have a genetic link to cancer and what they have to do. You all remember I think I said this last year to those of you who were here, Angelina Jolie had the gene for breast cancer. She had her breast removed and replaced to avoid going through the horror of breast cancer later in life. This is what we're talking about. We're talking about this. We're talking about all sorts of genetic possibilities that we can determine now. They claim that they can test blood and they can come up with a million different things that you may have that could be handed down to your children, and you have to keep looking for these different genes and see if they do carry on in your bloodline. So I just can't express to you how important it is that we have this. 30 years ago, I will tell you, I did go for genetic counseling, and I went to Boston Children's Hospital for it, but you know, it was nowhere near what we have today. So now, I mean, the doctors will tell you way more than I can. This bill was put together, it mostly is similar to Massachusetts and Connecticut. I did hear from the National Society of Genetic Counselors. They actually have some great language that we want to add. One of them, which is major language that they want to, some of the language is similar, but not exactly the way they would like it, but I think we can amend this bill. Anyway, that's what I'm trying to get at. So one of the things that it definitely changes, that it allows them to order the test, the genetic test, the blood test that will tell whether or not you carry the gene that could cause problems for you or a family member in the end. So the doctors, I believe, are on board with that, so I'm fine with it. And then because we don't have a licensing procedure in Rhode Island, we also want to add language on page 4 that those who are not licensing, that they apply for a license within 6 months without having to take the exam and all these other hoops that the newer ones will have to do. And they claim there's only 1 or 2 people that come under this exception. That's how few we have in Rhode Island. And I talked to Jen, who is a genetic counselor at Women and Infants. She has 700 patients. That's absurd. I mean, we need more genetic counselors in this state. And, you know, it's good for all of us. It's good for our health. It's good for our economy. It's good to have knowledgeable genetic counselors in this state who can help us with these painful, when I tell you painful decisions that women or men have to make when they find out they have anything like this. Step in their shoes. It takes a lot of time. It's a lot of counseling. It's difficult, very difficult decisions that they have to make. So we need to supply them with the educated people, available educated people. Like, we don't have enough, so we clearly need more. And they need to be able to find someone they can spend the time with who can go through every aspect of what their options are. And that's all this is trying to do. So please, let's pass it this year. I think it would have passed last year, but, we had the COVID, so.
Thank you, Chairwoman.
But thank you, Chairman, and thank you, members of the committee.
I know you said that you had some language that you'd like to suggest.
Yes,
If you
and
could
it's been
provide that to-
submitted.
If you could provide
Yeah,
that
Charlie
to-
sent it to me. I've seen it before. And I think we can amend it to work this out.
Yeah, if you could provide. Whip Kazarian?
I just have a quick question for the sponsor. So this looks great, and in passing this, would you say this would bring more of these genetic counselors, these professionals, to come to Rhode Island, to work in Rhode Island?
Yes, they could basically
wow.
put up a shingle and open their own practice if they wanted to, or they can be associated with the hospital or the doctors. But right now, that's their only mechanism. So like Dr. Silvestro, he hires a genetic counselor to be on his staff, and the only way they can get paid is through him. If we have the licensing procedure, they can get paid through the insurance companies.
Oh, wow.
So, it's a big deal, and we are really, why do we want to be an outlier on something like this? This is way too important, and people need the services, so let's get with it.
That's awesome. So
Right?
it's also economic driver. Thank you.
Thank
Chairwoman,
you.
how many states have this type of licensing?
What?
How many states have this type of licensing?
I was told last year that there's only 3 of us that don't have it. Now, I think Dr. Silvestro will tell you better. There may be a few more that have limited, something more limited than what we're proposing here. But I would say half the country is already doing what this bill with the amendments already does. So I think we're 10 minutes, we're an hour from Boston. We have major, wonderful hospitals here with, that we shouldn't be behind the 8 ball on this one. So let's, I just can't tell you enough how important it is. And I will very much object to putting any kind of conscience clause in this, which I think most of the women in this room and men would probably agree with me on. So, and you know what I'm talking about. But thank you very much, Chairman, and thank you, members of the committee. You'll hear from some great people tonight. And,
Thank you, Chairwoman. Are there any other questions for the Chairwoman? Speaker Pro Tem Kennedy, I see that your hand's up. I'm not sure if that's from before. Oh, okay.
Is he asking for me?
No, so you're all set. Thank you, Chairwoman. First up for witnesses, we will have Jennifer Schwab. Jennifer, you may proceed. You're before the House Committee on Corporations.
Wonderful. Hi, everybody. My name is Jen Schwab. I am a resident of East Greenwich, Rhode Island, and I'm a genetic counselor. I've been practicing in Rhode Island for 8 years. Mainly, I've been working in pediatrics and general genetics. I know we're going to be talking or hearing from a lot of people who have experience in cancer genetics, but my experience is sort of a little different. First, I'd like to thank Representative McEntee for all of your efforts in bringing the Genetic Counseling Licensing Act to the table, and for Chairman Solomon and the committee for hearing us today. So myself and the genetic counseling community at large actually only recently learned about this bill. And while I am in full support of the genetic counseling licensure in Rhode Island, I do have some reservations regarding H5147 as it's currently written, although I know Representative McEntee just very nicely outlines the amendments that would make this, a bill that I could support. So I also recognize that today we're talking about licensure for genetic counselors, and that the majority of people who are present today may not actually be familiar with who genetic counselors are or the kind of care that we provide. So I figured I would give you all a little bit of background on, what it takes to be a genetic counselor and what we do. So genetic counselors are healthcare providers who earn a graduate degree in genetic counseling from one of 50 accredited master degree programs in the country. We study a combination of science and psychosocial counseling theory. Through my education, I studied the genetic contribution to human disease, how genetic mutations can cause a condition or put somebody at risk to develop certain health problems. I understand how genetic mutations can be inherited in a family or how they can occur brand new in an individual. I understand what signs to look for in a personal and family history to determine if there is an increased risk for a genetic condition. And I understand the technology and the evolving, options that are available for genetic testing to confirm or to rule out a hereditary condition. More than that, though, I understand the human side of the science. So I'm trained to explain these really complex topics in a way that my patients can understand regardless of their education, their age, their culture, or their cognitive abilities. In my training, I'm trained to be non-directive, so I'm here to explain information and testing options in a balanced and unbiased way, really supporting families through their diagnostic journeys. And I'm here to help families adjust to a new normal once a genetic diagnosis has been made and help them navigate their next steps to receive continued care. Often this involves educating other healthcare providers who care for my patients long term on what the genetics behind their disease means. Since most other healthcare providers only receive very minimal genetics education and genetics is very quickly becoming a major part of healthcare, I find that my educating other healthcare providers is becoming more common in my current practice. And my education has really fostered the skills that I need to do this successfully. On top of my master's degree, I am board certified by the American Board of Genetic Counselors. So after completing my 2-year master's degree, I passed my board exam, and I recertify every 5 years by maintaining my continuing education requirements. Clinicians and patients need to know that the genetic counselors that they're working with are adequately trained and up to date on medical genetics. Issuing licensure would establish requirements and implement the minimum standards for individuals regarding their academic achievement, their clinical experience, and the skills that they need to deliver the high-quality genetic counseling services. Currently, our state has no legal standing for those who can identify themselves as genetic counselors. Therefore, anyone can label themselves as a genetic counselor, even if they have absolutely no training, which is putting the quality of care that our Rhode Island patients are receiving at risk. Again, I'm in full support of genetic counseling licensure as long as these amendments that were described can be adapted. And with that, I offer my support for H5147 with amendments, and thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you very much for your testimony. We have a question from Vice Chair Caldwell.
Yep. Hi, Jen. It's Justine Caldwell.
Hi.
I just wanted to thank you for coming before the committee and talking with us about all that and let everyone know how hard you have worked on behalf of your community of genetic counselors with Rep. McEntee to come up with a bill that's going to be really effective and to really encourage anyone who does have questions to ask or reach out to you because you are definitely a wealth of knowledge on this issue, and I really appreciated that, so thank you.
Thank you, and I appreciate being involved. Like I said, this is we're learning about this now, and I think that we can make this the bill that our state needs.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions for the witness? Seeing none? Representative Fenton-Fong.
Hi, thanks so much for your testimony. It's actually been very enlightening. Can you speak to something? I'm trying to get a better sense of what the standard education is. You mentioned you have a master's degree. Is that the base degree for someone in genetic counseling? Is it normally a master's, PhD? Like, what's the usual educational requirement here?
Yeah, so it is a master's degree. So there's 51 accredited universities, I believe, in the state right now, in the country, and it's a specific master's program in genetic counseling.
And where would the nearest program be?
So there are 2 in Boston, 1 in Waltham, Mass., and 1 in Western Mass. Those would be the closest.
Okay, so thank you. Obviously, we live in a great medical region here. Are you able to bill through any insurances currently?
Not currently. And there are codes for genetic counseling reimbursement, although, licensure is a big part of that. So we haven't been able to bill really effectively. And there are, nationwide, we're trying to get recognized through CMS to be able to bill more independently for our services.
Okay, thank you so much. This helps a lot. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for the witness? Hearing none, thank you. Going forward, because we still do have many witnesses on this bill who have all signed up in favor, as well as many witnesses on a few other bills coming up and other bills that we have to hear from, I am going to limit testimony to 3 minutes per witness. So if I would ask the witnesses testifying going forward that, if you agree with something a witness just prior had testified to, it would be very helpful to the committee to say that, I agree with the testimony you just received. And if there's anything additional that you'd like to add that you believe would be helpful to the committee, we would appreciate it if you could say that. So next up, I will go to William Campbell. William, you are on the line and before the House Committee on Corporations. You may proceed.
Hi, my name is William Campbell, and I'm glad to speak after Jen, who's my colleague. I'm a resident of Westerly, Rhode Island, and I just wanted to give you guys the opportunity to hear a little bit about a case that describes well in detail the kind of thing that Jen is mentioning as far as how we care for patients. So an example of a case that I saw recently was a 56-year-old woman who came to me because she has a history of hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. This is a heart condition that affects the heart muscle. So this woman had had this condition for over 40 years, and it progressed to the degree that her heart was no longer able to effectively pump blood to her body. And she's on the heart transplant list. Her brothers had a heart transplant for the same condition. And she had actually requested to see a genetic counselor because her specialist cardiologist had ordered genetic testing that had found a genetic mutation that she was born with that put her at increased risk for this condition, but had not really taken the time to explain this to her or what it meant for her family. And her concerns for her family were one of her major concerns. So I met with this patient. I learned her medical history, learned the medical history of her family, and then we went about doing genetic counseling or genetic testing for the relevant family members, which included 6 siblings in this large family, included nieces, nephews, great-nieces, and nephews. And through this process, we eventually identified which of her family members were at risk for this very significant heart disease and which families were not, and able to refer to the appropriate providers to care for these family members. And along the way, as Jen said, helping family members to come to terms with the fact that they have a genetic condition, explaining the natural history of that condition, what the appropriate way to maintain their health despite that they have this condition, and also helping them cope with having a young child that they've passed a genetic condition to. And as part of that, we help to connect them with national organizations that provide support for these individuals. So the course of working with this large Rhode Island family, we tested 15 people. People came from Boston and New York for these appointments, and I'm really proud that through this we've really identified who is at risk and who is not in this family. So this is just an example to illustrate what Jen was mentioning about how it is that we care for families with genetic conditions. And I really support this legislation in the ways, for many of the reasons that have already been mentioned, with amendments to help to provide support to us as genetic counselors and to the families that we work with. So I'd be happy to take any questions that people have.
Great, thank you. Are there any questions for the witness? Hearing none. Thank you very much for your testimony. Next up, we will take up Tracy, I can't read her last name, Keough? Tracy Keough. Tracy, you are before the House Committee on... Hold on one moment. Tracy Keough, you are before the House Committee on Corporations. You may proceed.
Thank you, Chairman Solomon, Representative McEntee, and committee. My name is Tracy Keough, and I appreciate the opportunity to testify in support of House Bill 5147. Rhode Island has one of the highest cancer rates in the country, and one of the most effective weapons against cancer is early detection, diagnosis, and treatment. Among one of the most important tools for catching cancer early and saving lives is genetic counseling to assess a patient's and family's risk for cancer. I'm here to speak on the importance of genetic counseling from the patient perspective. I'm very fortunate to be here tonight. I'm an ovarian cancer survivor. As you may know, ovarian cancer is known as the silent killer. It's the deadliest of all GYN cancers. I was diagnosed in 2013 and was treated with chemotherapy, had life-threatening side effects. It was very traumatic for my parents, devastating for my twin boys, and my husband. I'm sure everyone on this committee has been touched by a close family member or friend who has had to go cancer treatment. Thankfully, I made it through, and I'm now devoting my life to helping cancer patients. When I was diagnosed, I was made aware that my cancer could be linked to a mutation in one of my genes. 7 years ago, there were only 4 known genetic mutations being tested. Today, there are approximately 80 or more. Another element of genetic testing that has changed in 7 years since my diagnosis is that the identification of specific gene mutations now provides physicians with the information needed to prescribe targeted treatments that can in turn either extend or save patients' lives. And this could be for your family. When I asked my oncologist if I should get tested for all the new mutations, she said yes and immediately provided a referral, as having ovarian cancer puts you at risk for many more cancers. I never imagined it would take close to 6 months, almost a half a year, to secure my appointment with my genetic counselor. The very long wait time was a period of stress and worry for me, as I constantly worried, did I harbor a genetic mutation that could give my twin boys cancer? A cancer patient having to wait 6 months to get an appointment with a genetic counselor is a real barrier to getting the best oncology care in Rhode Island. When I inquired about the extended wait time, I was told that managed care companies such as Blue Cross and United will only reimburse for licensed health care providers, and that a bill would need to be passed so that our health systems could have the financial resources to provide more counselors. I would like to share that my husband's uncles all had stage 4 prostate cancer, and my husband was diagnosed with the same cancer. He's going to seek genetic counseling. I called Yale and Dana-Farber, and both out-of-state institutions said that patients seeking genetic counseling can be seen within 2 days to 2 weeks upon getting a referral. And again, this is not the case in Rhode Island. In Massachusetts and Connecticut, genetic counselors are licensed, and their legislatures made sure to make their citizens' health care a priority. And while a patient having to wait 6 months to get an appointment with a genetic counselor is a huge problem, the main reason I'm here to testify is because I believe we have more of a problem than just long wait times. As I stated earlier, Rhode Island has one of the highest cancer rates in the country. We have 20 counselors for 1 million people. The fact that Rhode Island does not license our genetic counselors begs 2 questions in my mind. Could the fact that we have a shortage of licensed genetic counselors be contributing to our high cancer rate? Are patients migrating to our neighboring states of Connecticut and Massachusetts for genetic counseling services and ultimately their cancer care? I think the answer to these questions is yes. I just want to thank everyone because I believe we're all on common ground and that patients and policymakers can together create meaningful change.
Thank you, Tracy.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions for the witness? Hearing none? Thank you. Next up, we have Kathy Drake. And I would remind the witnesses that going forward, if you agree with the last witness's testimony, to just to acknowledge that you agree with the last witness's testimony and that you support the bill, because everyone signed up here today is supporting the bill. So, Kathy, you are before the House Committee on Corporations. You may proceed.
Okay, thank you so much. Tracy Keough asked me to testify today because my family and I have benefited directly from genetic testing and counseling for the BRCA genetic mutation. 4 of my immediate family members, including myself, tested positive for this deadly mutation. My extended family, cousins, aunts were impacted as well. While genetic testing and counseling did save my life and the life of my nephew, who was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer when he was only 12 years old, sadly, it was too late for my mother and sister, who are not as fortunate and lost their battles with breast and ovarian cancers at age 65 and my sister at age 49. My sister was a mother to 2 young children, and as you can imagine, losing her at such a young age was devastating. Although the testing came too late for them, I am beyond happy to share that my nephew's surgery was successful, and he is now a 12-year pancreatic cancer survivor, proudly serving as an officer in the United States Marine Corps. As for me, 10 years ago, thanks to the results of genetic testing and counseling, I opted for preventative surgeries and have largely mitigated my risk for ever developing these deadly cancers. The cost of my preventative surgeries was significantly less expensive than the radical surgeries and extremely expensive trial drugs and chemotherapy protocols my mother and sister received. So to keep this short and sweet, I'd like to thank you for your time, and I hope you all will support this bill.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your testimony. Any questions for the witness? Hearing none. Thank you. Next up, we will take up Dr. Anthony Mega. He's unavailable, but he did sign up in favor of this legislation. Next up, we will take up Joe Zeobeck. You are before the House Committee on Corporations. You may proceed. And if you may shut off the volume behind you, I believe it sounds as if you have the TV on behind you.
Yeah, I think I just turned it off.
Okay. You may proceed.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity to present. Recognizing that there are other people to speak, I'm going to paraphrase my remarks. I want to talk about, basically emphasize 3 things: why I support this bill, the value to our family of genetic counseling, and the impact of cancer on the family. I'm testifying in support of House Bill 5147, the Genetic Counseling Licensing Act, from the perspective of a spouse, a father, and a caregiver. 17 years ago, my wife was diagnosed with ovarian cancer, and she has been in treatment for the majority of the years since, including 4 clinical trials. We were advised that we should get genetic testing to see if there was a family history of cancer. So I was tested, my wife, my sister, who also is an ovarian cancer survivor, and my daughters as well. And what we learned is that I have a BRCA1 mutation and pass it along to my older daughter. My wife has a BRCA2 mutation and pass it along to my younger daughter. So not only did I have to be concerned about my wife's care, but I've had the worry about would my daughters end up in the same situation and go through what my wife has gone through. We learned through genetic counseling that there was other cancers on both the maternal and paternal sides of the family. In short, including myself, we're all at greater risk for cancer. The value to the family of genetic counseling was that knowing that my daughters had a predisposition to cancer, breast cancer, ovarian cancer, etc., they were able to get counseling themselves that enabled them to take some preemptive measures or to consider some preemptive measures as they aged. And I think Representative McAtee referred to Angelina Jolie, who took some measures, and that's what my daughters are facing. Fortunately, we didn't have to wait 6 months. We had to wait some time, but it wasn't 6 months. But can you imagine undergoing a colonoscopy and waiting 6 months to get the test results? 17 years of treatment for cancer can devastate a family, emotionally, physically, and financially. There's a term being used in the cancer world now called financial toxicity. Our out-of-pocket medical costs exceed $20,000 a year. There are not a lot of families that are in a situation that can drive you into bankruptcy. The value to us of this particular bill cannot be understated. If you know that what the risk factors are for cancer, you can take some preventive measures. And so that's why, in conclusion, I support this bill wholeheartedly. I'm thankful that we're able to get genetic counseling. My daughters have had genetic counseling and have access now to screening and detection tools to monitor them closely so that hopefully they won't have to go through what my wife has gone through and will continue to go through. It's a family issue, as Tracy said. It doesn't affect just one person in the family. I thank you very much for this opportunity to share my story.
Thank you for your testimony. Are there any questions for the witness? Hearing none? Thank you. Next up, we will go to Dr.
Thank
Paul DiSilvestro. Someone could get the doctor on the line. Doctor, you are on the line and before the House Committee on Corporations. You may proceed with your testimony, and if you could just turn off the TV in the background or lower the volume on the TV in the background. You may proceed. Hello?
Hello, this is John Richardson. Am I on?
Yes, you're on.
Hi. Sorry about that. I represent the National Society of Genetic Counselors, and I want to thank Chairwoman McEntee, also Vice Chair Caldwell and Rep. Kazarian for being sponsors of this important legislation. I also want to thank all the patient advocates and the physicians that support it as well. We support this bill with amendments. The bill will help protect the public from unqualified individuals and improve access to high-quality genetic services in Rhode Island. And as others had stated, workforce generally does grow after states enact these licensure bills. With Massachusetts and Connecticut having licensure, this will align, Rhode Island with those neighboring states. Currently, 29 states issue licenses to genetic counselors. I have worked in 28 of those 29 states to help enact this legislation. The other states, almost all of them, are in some form of enacting bills. So I think we'll see this year, 5 or 6 or 7 more states add it. And we're working hard in those others to get this done. I have submitted written testimony, so I won't review all of that. Our recommended amendments are included, and they mostly are technical in nature. The one major issue is the scope of practice, and so it'll align the scope of practice to better reflect genetic counselor training in their practice. And so this is the scope that's been used in licensure for the last several years. So in conclusion, look forward to working with the bill sponsors, and I offer myself as a resource as you all move forward. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Are there any questions for the witness? Hearing none, thank you. Next up, we'll go back to Dr. Anthony Mega.
So in conclusion,
Doctor, you are before the House Committee on Corporations. If you could just turn down the volume in the background, we do hear it, so you may proceed with your testimony.
Good evening. I'd like to thank Chairman Solomon and Representative McEntee. And I am in agreement with all the previous speakers in regards to House Bill 5147. I am a medical oncologist. I work for Brown Medicine and Lifespan Cancer Institute. I just want to give the perspective that genetic counseling and the subsequent appropriate genetic testing is extraordinarily valuable in guiding cancer care. There are many therapeutic options that are now available only if you have certain genetic mutations. So the identification of these mutations are critical in the management of common cancers such as prostate, pancreatic, breast, ovarian, and less common cancers such as sarcoma. And I just want to, I know I don't want to belabor points that have been made. I just want to add a different perspective. I'm also the Director of Medical Education for Oncology for Brown, and the development of a workforce, a qualified workforce in genetic counseling that meets our needs, both from a patient perspective and for an educational perspective. They will be valuable members of educational teams at the universities, and I can foresee, given the wealth of our educational facilities, that we could in the future enter the arena into masters for genetic counseling. So I think it adds another avenue for us. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your testimony, Doctor. Are there any questions for the witness? Hearing none. Thank you. Next up, we have Dr. Paul DiSilvestro. Doctor, you may proceed with your testimony before the House Committee on Corporations.
Oh, hi. Thank you, and good evening. My name is Dr. Paul DiSilvestro. I'm a gynecologic oncologist and director of the program in women's oncology at Women Infants Hospital, where we primarily treat patients with breast and GYN malignancies. Since the initial identification of the BRCA gene in 1991 through the Human Genome Project, as well as the Cancer Genome Atlas, we've really come to learn the critical role that genetics plays in both familial risk for cancer, as well as in potentially understanding the mechanisms by which cancer is developed. We use that information in conjunction with genetic counselors to help determine two distinct strategies. One is, well, can we prevent these cancers by identifying patients at risk? And we've been able to do that. But lately, and even becoming more prevalent, is can we target cancer specifically for treatment based on the genetic makeup of both the tumor and or the patient themselves. And that's become actually a focused biomarker for approval by the FDA of certain drugs that we utilize on a daily basis in our program. So lack of licensure is a problem for the state of Rhode Island. We have 20 genetic counselors in total. We have a hard time both attracting genetic counselors to come work in our state and also losing them to competitors such as the pharmaceutical industry. Licensure will help us to allow these highly trained clinicians to bill for their services and create a revenue base to support them. This licensure bill has two separate aspects which I think are important. One is grandfathering in those genetic counselors that have spent their careers here, dedicated to the women and men of Rhode Island and in regards to genetic counseling, and also provide an infrastructure for going forward for licensure and privileging in the state of Rhode Island. So we fully support this in the cancer realm. We've had the wonderful opportunity to work with many genetic counselors, and currently we have 5 at our institution, and they play an extremely important role in cancer care. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your testimony, Doctor. Are there any questions for the doctor? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. And last up, we have Jennifer Scalia, who's unavailable but did sign up in favor of this legislation. Additionally, we did receive written testimony from Sarah Spinett, who's a genetic counselor in favor, the National Society of Genetic Counselors in favor, Cindy Benson in favor, Jen Schwab in favor, Lauren Constantin in favor, Lauren Messinigan in favor, the Rhode Island Commission for Human Rights in favor. All of those were in favor with amendments. The Rhode Island Medical Society has concerns with amendments, and the ACLU does not have a position but did submit written testimony on it. So that concludes the hearing on House Bill 5147.